Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Jenny Chou, bookseller and school event coordinator at Boswell Book Company, a Wisconsin-owned independent bookshop located on Milwaukee's east side. Today is day 4,626 of us being in business, and it's all thanks to you, because without you, we wouldn't have a bookstore. I'm so thrilled and excited to be in conversation tonight with New York Times bestselling author Joan He, author of my number one favorite book of 2021, The Ones We're Meant to Find. If you have questions for Joan, please enter them into the Q&A. Joan is a recent graduate of the University of Pennsylvania, where she majored in psychology and East Asian languages and cultures, and still managed to find time to write two novels. School Library Journal chose The Ones We're Meant to Find as one of their best books of 2021, so they agreed with me, saying, in a future world ravaged by climate change, sisters C and Casey will do anything to get back to each other in the wake of C's disappearance. Sisterly love is leveraged against the greater good in this gripping and eerily plausible sci-fi thriller. So, Joan, how did you come up with the idea for The Ones We're Meant to Find?
Well, first off, thank you so much for having me, Jenny.
You're so welcome.
And I just absolutely have been so grateful for all your support of the book since even pre-release. I sort of like the idea. So this is going to sound cliche, but the initial, I guess, imagery, the first image I had came from a dream where I had this image of this girl diving to the bottom of the sea looking for something or someone, and I wasn't sure what yet at the time, but this image stuck with me. And so I was really thinking about what sort of story could I build around this image. And growing up, I was a teen during the 2010s young adult dystopian boom. So I cut my teeth on books like The Hunger Games, Divergent, Legend by Marie Lu. And those books really shaped how I view young adult literature and also storytelling. So I really wanted to do my own spin on dystopia while somehow incorporating this image. And the more I thought about it, the more I was like, okay, well, in a lot of these books, you have characters who are very kick-ass and who go on to do incredible things that are made relatable by the author, oftentimes through the relationships they have. And I really thought about The Hunger Games, how you have Katniss, who is made immediately relatable because she's willing to sacrifice everything for her younger sister, Prim, who doesn't actually have that much, I guess, page time or even plot I guess, significance in the sense that she's not really the one driving the plot. It's more Katniss. So I was like, okay, what if I take this trope and I have this girl who's searching for someone in the ocean be the older sister, and then also write the perspective of the younger sibling, but have the younger sibling be so much more than just a plot device or a cue for relatability and empathy. And I really wanted to subvert this expectation that the relationship between sisters is something that is empathetic and human, and make that part of the big twist. So I would say the image first, and then wanting to subvert this trope, and then the twist was my inspiration for the whole story.
So you and Stephanie Meyer both started with a dream.
Yeah.
So I wanted, since you brought up Casey, I really wanted to talk about her. I have to find that question. Let's see. So I tend to love characters that come off as a little prickly. So I loved Katniss in The Hunger Games. And I loved this character. I don't know if you've read A Deadly Education by Naomi Novik, but it was it was one of my favorite books of last year. And the main character's name is Elle, and she comes off also as a little bit prickly. And it's a great book for people who love dark, magical boarding school fiction, but which is me. But anyway, so I felt like you really set yourself up for a challenge and you really pulled it off. What were some of the things you considered when you were writing Casey?
I think Casey is definitely like the complete opposite of C, who is the other sister in point of view. And so when I was constructing the point of views, I will say that C came to me first because she's kind of like a homage to the kind of like, again, like the kick-ass kind of characters that you often would see in young adult dystopian. Like she's determined, but she's also vulnerable and she like has emotions, and she's very like immediate in the way that you often see in young adult. And I wanted to reflect that even in the choice of the point of view, because I wrote in first present. And that, like, when I think of first present, I think of a lot of these like early onslaught of young adult books. So once I knew C's personality, I knew that I wanted Casey to be the complete, again, opposite of that. And I love that you mentioned like it seemed like a challenge, because it definitely was. I just felt like there weren't that many Caseys, I guess, in books I've read that I felt like were, I guess, like fan favorites or popular or well received. And so Casey herself is insecure about how like she comes across to other people. And I will say that as I was writing her, like that was definitely something that was weighing on my mind. I would say like in the first couple of drafts, Casey was a much more diluted character. She was still quiet and much more like passive, I guess, in terms of like her interactions with other people, but she didn't have as much personality as what you finally see, because I was afraid that if I tried to make her own person, people wouldn't like that. And it turns out that at the end of the day, like there are still people who don't like Casey for the reasons I suspected, which is that she is much more removed and distant and cold, but in a way that I personally find relatable, because like Casey, I mean, I wanted to be like the protagonist I'd read about as a teen, but I definitely wasn't like them at all. And it was much more like Casey, like not knowing how to have like the best reply to someone, not like being smart but not witty. That was something that I really wanted to convey, because I think a lot of times you read characters who are smart who always have like the best comeback, or sarcastic, or like downplay their intelligence. And for Casey, like I really wanted her intelligence to just be it's just like a part of her, and she doesn't like interact with it in a playful way, because she doesn't even like think about it. She just is herself. And that was something that I tried really hard to convey. I'm glad that you liked her as a character.
Oh, I liked her very much. And one thing that continuously made me laugh was Silver Tongue.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's not giving anything away to say what that is. Do you want to explain it?
Sure. Yeah, it's just like, so like in this world, everyone they have like apps in their heads. Basically imagine like your iPhone but in your head. And there's this one app that's like a conversation, I guess, facilitator that helps you think of like the correct thing to say, or like how you should reply in a certain situation. So Casey has that app installed, and there will be lots of moments where she's talking to someone and like Silver Tongue will suggest that she says something or like show some sort of emotion that's appropriate, and then Casey will be like, this is so like I don't like this, right?
She's like, I can't say that. That's just not me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I have to admit, as someone who never thinks of the right witty reply at the right moment, that I kind of wish I had that app installed. So I read a galley of the ones we were meant to find pretty early, and I remember reading along, wondering, where's this all going to go? This is a really good book. And then your spectacular twist hit. And I think I literally dropped the book and I said, oh my God, out loud. And I don't think I have ever been so blown away by such a brilliantly pulled off twist, or at least since I read We Were Liars, which also has its own terrific twist. So I'm not going to say what the twist is. So friends out there, if you haven't read the book yet, you've got to read it and find out the twist for yourself. But did you know that twist when you went into writing the book? That's all I'm going to ask about it.
Yeah, so it definitely, like the moment I thought about, like, again, like that image I had, like, what is this person searching for? The moment I thought okay, I want to have an older sibling searching for a younger sibling, that's kind of when I thought of the twist, because I really thought about how, I guess like in literature, like what sort of things do we as authors try to use to like humanize and make a character empathetic and relatable? And I thought about those cues and I was like, I want to completely subvert that, right? And so like that's kind of how the twist came about, because I was like, okay, like she's searching for her younger sister because of this reason, and this is the twist. And then like the rest of the plot built from there.
So if you're out there watching and you have questions for Joan, feel free to enter them into the Q&A and I'll read them as we go along. So let's see. Candace says that twist was what made the book for me and brought into play so many great questions about what it means to feel emotion, desire, and to be human.
Oh, thank you, Candace.
What a nice thing to say. And I totally agree. And a lot of the book does make you consider what it means to be human. And we won't say anything more than that. You got to read the book if you want to understand that comment. And let's see. Besides being about the relationship between two sisters, which I think is really the meat of your book, the ones we're meant to find is about the consequences of climate change. So what is one thing that you hope readers take away and really consider about the health of our planet?
That's such a good question that I've been asked many times, and each time I feel like my answer is just like, I don't want to make it too depressing, but honestly, I feel like I don't really have one message that I want readers to take away after reading the book. Because I feel like a lot of times when there's like a book about climate change, the assumption is that like the book wants you to like take action or to like do something about the climate change. And while that is my personal belief, I feel like what I really wanted to show in this story is that like not everyone is able to take certain actions. And while this problem might seem pressing right now, because we as the US, we've experienced like wildfires and like all these things recently, this has been a like climate change itself has been a problem that's impacted countries for a long time. Like in the case of China, it's been a problem for decades at this point, where air pollution has just been this omnipresent like lifestyle thing. And that's part of the reason why like masking was so prevalent at the start of the pandemic, because people are used to masking, not just for like the virus, but like for the atmosphere reasons. And so like you can always say like, oh, like XYZ should do this, but there are so many, like I just think every choice, even when it seems like a good choice, has a consequence, even if it's a short-term consequence, and everyone has different abilities to make those choices. And I think when you read the book, like you see like from Casey's point of view, she's kind of like I guess like if we were all really logical about solving this problem as humans, like she kind of takes the route that I think a lot of people think we should take deep down. But I do try to show that in her society, there is sort of a loss, however temporary, that comes from taking actions to prevent future loss. And it's not saying that we shouldn't take those actions, but I think just being aware of that makes it so that people can be more open-minded to taking action. Because I think a lot of times like you can be prescriptive about like we should do this, and while it might be like the objective right answer, like 50 years down the line, it's really hard for people to think 50 years down the line, right? So to like get people to do things, you really have to speak to them on like what problem is most pressing at them and try to build that line of communication. So yeah, I don't really have that many answers. I do think I'm a bit of a pessimist on the issue, along with a lot of other issues that face our world, because I think like the book really it dives into the things that I feel like are kind of essences of humanity that are going to hold us back from solving this problem. That makes it very hard to solve this problem. But at the same time, like I think the flaws that make us human are also the things that allow us to innovate and to come together rapidly. So it's kind of like this thing where I think everyone, if there's one message, I guess everyone does live at the expense of someone else. That's something that I show in the twist. That's something that is true in climate change. And I don't think denying it is the best route. Like, I think accepting that, like, everything that you use, it comes from somewhere else. Everything that you, like, every freedom that you have, the fact that you have it is because our society is built by drawing resources or whatever from somewhere else. Like, accepting that, I think, and then trying to do whatever you're able to do within your bubble is the best that everyone can do.
Well, I think that was such a great answer. And the one word that stuck with me is innovate, and how humans, we are constantly innovating and thinking of different ways to do things. And last night I heard a story on NPR just about the fashion industry and how much they cause pollution, which actually never occurred to me. And so it was an interesting story. And I thought, there's got to be something that they can do to innovate, to use less water, to use less cotton. And that's something that comes across, I think, in your book, that they actually, people wear clothes that are very different from what we wear now.
Yeah,
So,
I think people have like two sets of clothes.
Yeah,
and like in the book, yeah.
That's what it seemed to me in the book. And let's see. So what was the most interesting thing you learned while you were researching the ones we're meant to find?
So I had to look up how, like, what the total volume would be if you smushed every single human into like one container, which if you read the book, you'll know why, but I needed to figure out, like, what's the volume of humanity? That was like an interesting question. I think if you put everyone in a box, the box is like the size of Rhode Island. So surprisingly, we don't actually take up that much space if you stack everyone on top of each other. But other than that, like,
that is actually really fascinating.
yeah. But like you, like, I actually had read about like what are the top industries that produce wastewater, and like fashion came up as one of them. And like I definitely read about how, like, even when things are sustainable, like even recycling, it can cause like more pollution than not creating that trash in the first place, right? And so definitely, like, a lot of the research that I did, it was fascinating to see, like, we've created a lot of, I think, these like marketing kind of catchwords that make people feel better about certain things that they consume and do. And while it is better than like the worst alternative, it's still not like quite as good as if you could like cut back down on consumption.
So I have to say, The Ones We're Meant to Find is an intriguing title to begin with. But over the course of reading the novel, it becomes clear how truly awesome this title is. And how did you come up with such a great title? And did you go through many ideas before you settled on this one?
I'm so glad you like it, because I was only after publication that my editor told me that like the title had come up in conversation at like the sales marketing meeting, where someone was like, do we want to change it? And my editor was the best, and she like didn't even tell me that this happened, and she was just like, nah. So
she really went to bat for you and said, we're not changing it.
Yeah.
That's great.
I was glad to only learn this after publication, because otherwise I would have been like, oh no. But yeah, I was really lucky with, I mean, in general, I really like having titles of my books before I start writing them, because they kind of like form, they shape like how I want to pull out the theme. And I usually try to like title drop the title in like in a line or two. So I did have this title from the start, and I'm trying to remember, but I don't think, because I wrote this draft back in 2017, but I don't recall having like any other title or even like a placeholder title. I mean, to my friends, I say ocean book, but I think from the start, I always knew it was The Ones We're Meant to Find. And yeah, I'm glad that it's been able to stay.
And what about your first book? Was that the original title?
So Descent of the Crane, that's funny because it wasn't. So back when I drafted it, I started drafting that one in like late 2013. And at that time, I didn't really see any fully Chinese fantasies. So the world back when I was first drafting it used to be like half China, half Rome. I kind of used like the Roman elements to dilute some of the Chineseness and also to like make the names more, Western and more palatable, because I really just wasn't sure that something that was fully Chinese would sell until in like 2017 when Julie Dow's Forest of a Thousand Layers came out. I was like, oh wow, like this is a fully Chinese world with like fully Chinese names. So back when I had drafted it, the title of the book was actually Hasina's name, but her like Romanized version of the name. So and then when I changed it, I was like, okay, I still want the title to be about the main character, even if it's not going to be like a name title. And so I was thinking, like, how do I describe the main character? And I came up with Descendant of the Crane. So yeah, the title changed after I rewrote the book, like between rounds of submission, when I stripped out like the Roman elements and made it fully Chinese.
And we have another question. While reading the book, I was reminded of so many other great books exploring futuristic worlds addressing climate crisis. What fiction authors have influenced your writing on this topic?
Yeah, so I think kind of like I mentioned, like a lot of like the big inspiration behind the book are those early dystopians. So I was hugely influenced by Marie Lu, Suzanne Collins, and Lauren DeStefano, who wrote Wither, the Chemical Garden trilogy. And I think back then, like the books weren't necessarily like focused on climate change, but there are a lot of elements of climate change in like the dystopic world building. Like I remember in Legend by Marie Lu, like half of Los Angeles is just underwater because like the seas have risen. So while like these books, and I'm sure like for the Hunger Games, like I'm sure one of the reasons why like this dictatorship rose was because like a lot of society was facing problems from like climate change or like environmental change.
Definitely environmental change. Yeah.
Yeah. So I would say those were my influences in terms of the topic. In terms of like wanting to write something that kind of addresses futuristic worries in like an innovative way, I love Neil Shusterman and what he does with his books. Most recently, Scythe. Like I love that trilogy, and I loved how he wasn't just exploring like the society and the tech, but how like humans create systems and like propaganda and like messages around these problems. And I guess in adult world, I love reading The Expanse. I'm actually like in the middle of reading the last book right now. And while those books aren't like focused on climate change as we now experience it, it's more about like the aftermath of what happens when we expand out from Earth and start colonizing and drawing resources from other worlds. And it really explores how like a lot of the problems that we face now are still the same problems that we're going to face even when we've spread to like entire galaxies.
So one of my favorite Neil Shusterman books to sell is Dry. Have you read that? It's the one
Yes,
he
I
read
did.
with his son. He wrote with his son. Yeah, and that kind of is a parallel to your book, because for those of you who haven't read it, it's about the day that California runs out of water and the consequences. And it's a consequence that are something that we're going to have to face someday, and we're going to have to figure out a way to deal with. So both your take and Dry are very interesting ways of looking at that subject. So my next question is, so the cover of your book is gorgeous. Let's look at it one more time. It's so beautiful. I bet you never get tired of looking at it. And it really makes the book stand out in the bookstore. And can you tell us about the artist and how this particular image was chosen?
Yeah, so the artist's name, I feel like I'm gonna butcher in pronunciation, so I might actually just paste it into the chat. Let me
Yeah, that'd be good.
Pull it up. So it's funny because like the initial direction that we were going for wasn't this direction. I always wanted like an illustrated cover because I love seeing how like another artist kind of renders something and puts their own spin on it. But I think initially like the team came up with a cover that's more in line with what the We Are Liars cover is. It was more like photorealistic with like a hazy background, and I kind of was like,
I've got a copy right here. So,
yeah.
There you go.
So it was much more like that, and I was like, I kind of was like, well, I really want, like, I like that direction because it doesn't scream sci-fi, and even though there's a lot of tech and futuristic stuff in the book, besides wanting to make it like a dystopia, I really wanted to just write like a human story. And I wasn't necessarily thinking like, oh, like science tech. So I wanted a cover that reflected that human element. So I liked that element of like the original direction that we were going with, but I really wanted the sisters to be more prominent because it is at its heart or a sister story. So I was like, okay, like, could we try like do an illustrated face, like two faces, and they kind of just ran with it. And I remember like my two requests were just like, I want sisters on the cover, and I also want the ocean, because I think those are the two important imagery aspects of the book that I felt like would translate well into a cover.
Yeah, well, they certainly did a great job. And how did you come across this artist, or did the art department find him?
So I first saw his work actually with another cover that he did, which is Wilder Girls by Rory Power. He illustrated that cover. And so after I saw that back in when I debuted, I started following his work, and I kind of like saw his entire range. And he really does such a great job with like faces, but also not just like realistic faces, but he has like this surreal element that's running through a lot of his works that I think was like perfect for like what I wanted to convey. Yeah.
And so you've written a fantasy for your first book, your Chinese fantasy, and you've written a sci-fi now. Are you going to go back to these genres for your next book, or maybe explore another genre?
So for my next book that's slated for fall 2022, I'm going back to Chinese fantasy, and I'm really excited because
that's great.
Yeah. So that's going to be like a retelling of Three Kingdoms. So it's not related to my debut Descendant, but yeah, returning to Chinese fantasy. But in general, I am not someone who I feel like I have to stick within a genre. Like I really just want to write the story that comes to me, and usually the story that I decide to write next is the one that I feel like has the most compelling twist. So it so happened that I actually had drafted this book right after I finished edits of Descendant, the one that's coming out, and also after I drafted the ones we're meant to find. So I remember like Descendant, like we were trying to submit it and trying to sell it. And as I was waiting, I was like, oh no, like I need to like prepare other books in case it doesn't sell, because it's on its second round of submission. It already been through like a huge rewrite. So I just banged out the ones we're meant to find. And then after that, I was like, okay, now I want to return to Chinese fantasy. So I wrote a Chinese fantasy, and it's funny how it's like worked out, even though the order has been slightly different, because initially I was like, oh, maybe it'd be nice to follow up with like a Chinese fantasy after Descendant. It actually worked out well to like sell the ones we're meant to find first, and then sell my next book. Yeah.
Okay, so it kind of shows that you are capable as a writer of going off in many different directions, and it sounds like you have a lot of books inside of you.
Yeah, I would like to hope I have many different directions. I mean, one day I would love to dabble in like adult, but I don't feel quite ready yet. So I mean, young adult's always where my heart's going to be at. It's like kind of what got me into reading. So
Do you think you'll ever do a contemporary?
I did write a contemporary, like it was my third manuscript. So this was before I wrote the first draft of Descendant. And I love that book, but I feel like it's really bad. And it's not one that I would like pull out of the drawer and try to sell. I guess my one issue with contemporary is that while I love writing the voice, I feel very insecure about like being up to date with like, you know, how teens actually talk. and
Mhm.
speak. I mean, even when I was a teenager myself, I always felt like a little bit like of an old soul, like I'm kind of an outcast, like not necessarily being on top of like the trends or even knowing what musician was like hot or etc. So like that's the thing where I'm like, contemporary, like you really need to nail those things because like it shows when you're not on top of it, right? So I guess
It
for
does.
that, yeah, for that reason, I'm like, I don't know. That's like the one that I'm just like, I'm not sure if I will dabble in contemporary, but who knows?
Who knows? I'm sure I would love to read it if you do write
Thanks.
it. Um, and let's see. If you got to be an indie bookseller for a day, say you got to come and work with us at Boswell for a day, what new releases would you suggest to YA readers?
Oh my God, there's so many. I been really lucky to like read some of these in advance for blurb or like as an arc. So one that
Hmm.
actually just came out is Iron Widow by Shiran J. Zhao. Um, and that book is just like, if you love anime or like Chinese sci-fi fantasy and like big epic battles, like I highly recommend that one. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people have heard of it because it's been doing really, really, really well. But that book I would recommend.
It's called Iron Widow.
Yeah, Iron Widow.
Okay, I'm going to type that into the chat. Iron Widow. Okay, I want to make sure that I get a chance to read it.
Yeah, I'm sure you'll love it. And I also really love June He's most recent release, The Forest of Stolen Girls. She kind of
Hmm.
has been writing like her debut and also this book, which is her second. They're all like these Korean historical mysteries. And her next upcoming book in January is also like a Korean historical mystery. And she just does the atmosphere so well. And for Forest of Stolen Girls, that actually has like a sister relationship too. And
Oh,
it's her,
cool.
yeah. So yeah, I highly recommend. Oh, and one more. Sorry, these are all like Chinese or like Asian books. So that's just because I've just been so happy to see like so many of these books now as compared to like when I was a teen. Like you wouldn't be able to find like a bajillion. And even now, I feel like I love that it's on the rise, but there's so many more that could be written and published. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, so a recent release by a really dear friend of mine is Jade Fire Gold by June Tan. And that, again, like if you love Chinese dramas, if you love, I think she's been pitching it as like Avatar, but like Zutara. Um, sorry, not, yeah, Zutara. So like if you love Avatar, if you love like sweeping adventure epics, like I would highly recommend that.
So does anyone else have any questions for Joan? If you do, type them into the Q&A. And I do want to mention one other book called Lucky Girl,
Oh
because
yeah.
yeah, which I think we both loved.
Yeah.
And it's set right here in Wisconsin, and it was written by someone who was also in Pitch Wars with Joan and myself in 2015, Jamie Packton, who I've also
Yeah.
done an event with. So if you, friends, if you get a chance to read and you want to read a really fun contemporary, I highly recommend Lucky Girl. I love
Yeah.
selling that book.
And she's actually coming over to Young Adult Fantasyland next year, her next book, which I've read like early draft of, which was really awesome. So super
Oh,
excited.
great. Oh, well, open the doors and welcome her
Yeah.
in. That's great. Um, so it looks like I've asked all the questions. So Joan, I just really want to thank you for being here with us tonight. This was super fun to get to chat with you
Of
about your
course.
books. And everybody, the ones we're meant to find, we have lots of copies at Boswell. So make sure you stop by and pick up a copy.
Was there another question or no in the, I think I
Oh,
just saw.
here's one more in the
I
chat.
can't see.
Could you share the title of the Di Stefano trilogy again?
Oh yeah. So the first book is called Wither. And the title of the trilogy is The Chemical Garden.
Great. That gives us all something to a lot more books to add to our reading pile, which I have a feeling, if you're anything like me, is like as tall as my house. But
Oh my God.
so thanks everyone for being here. This was super fun. And let's do this again when your next book comes out.
Thank you so much, Jenny. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming.
Okay. Good night, everyone. Good to see you. Good night.
Bye.